Many of us are fortunate to have incredible mentors in our lives, people we can turn to, ask questions to, and share our failures with. But how do you become a mentor? Do you have to have worked in the industry for 50 years? Do you have to be a walking encyclopedia of answers and knowledge? We would argue no. The best mentors are those who know themselves, know what they have to offer, and can connect you with others. You're ready to be a mentor. We believe in you. Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp in our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble. We're here to burst that bubble. We know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives. We're excited to delve into those. We're your host, Rachel Kent. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
We're here to go beyond camp with you. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening today. Be sure to check out the show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Now, let's get started. Today, we're really excited to dive into the topic of mentorship, but from a completely different and perhaps opposite perspective than what we've talked about before. I know Cassie and I have often talked about the power of mentors and how much we have enjoyed the mentors in our life, and we're really grateful for folks who've mentored us. But we also understand that as a young professional, there's opportunities for us to mentor people as well. And so today we're going to dive into what it looks like to be a mentor. Do you have to know everything? Do you have to be a certain age, certain number of years of experience before you can do this? Or are you maybe already doing it and just don't realize it? So really excited to dive into this because we think that mentorship and intentionality are so intertwined and we need them to be connected there. So Cassie, I'm going to flip it to you to start. I know we have like the definition of a mentor, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what the word mentor means to you.
For sure. So when we started thinking about this, I was like, okay, what is a mentor? Because I was like, what do people think it is? So what is it perceived to be? So I looked up the definition, and it was an experienced and trusted advisor, advise or train someone, especially a younger colleague. And to me, that was like, cool, great. But I think it's more than that, because especially when it's like got the word colleague in there, do you just have to have mentors in the workplace? Can you have mentors in other parts of your life? Right. And it got me really thinking about how I mentor other people or help them gain skills. Sometimes I don't think of it as technically being a quote unquote mentor. It's being that person that you're coaching or bringing up into like fill your shoes later on type thing. Is it probably mentoring, or is it just a perception of how I do things? I don't know.
Maybe being a mentor is just sort of like who you are as well, like sort of
Yeah.
intertwined with your personality. I think often folks who are good mentors, it's just sort of like integral to who they are because they see goodness in other people or like strengths in other people. Goodness is a really vague word, but like they see strengths, they see potential in other people. That's the word I'm looking for, potential, on this Sunday morning. They see potential in other people and they want to develop that. At work, we used Clifton Strengths Finder as a sort of like way to look at your personality and different strengths you have. And a strength a lot of folks have is developer, and that's the ability to see things in other people and want to develop that. And I think mentors have an innate sense and an ability to do that. And I think it can be developed with intentionality. I think it exists in all of us, especially in camp folks. Like we want to see better in other people, right? Like that's why we're doing this. That's why we love to work with young people, because we want to see them develop and get better. And so I think it's being intentional about that. I think to me, when we talk about mentorship, and a little bit later on, we're going to dive into like mentorship versus coaching, and where we think those are similar or different. But to me, mentorship is more holistic. It's more vague in a sense and like soft skilly. Yeah, like more like, oh, I see that you like have potential and that you really are passionate about this. How can we mold this and work with you so that you could take this next step in leadership? Or how can we help you develop like really great conflict resolution skills because we think you're going to be a great leader, and I can already see that you're like in that position. Like I think to me that's what mentorship is. It's more focused on who the person is, and it might encompass like all aspects of someone's life. So when I think of it, especially because my background is overnight camp, I think it might be more like looking at a staff member and be like, you have this potential, how do we make this work? Like are you looking at like places to go to school? Maybe we like are talking a little bit about that, and also your leadership abilities, or maybe we're looking at like where you want to go next and what leadership abilities you can develop at camp to take you to that next level type of thing. So it's more well-rounded.
Yeah, that makes so much more sense. I like that whole person concept. Like, it's not just one aspect of their life that you're focused on.
Yeah, and I mean, like, maybe that's what mentorship means to me, and I think that the beauty of mentorship is that it's different to every person as well, and that,
Yeah.
like, might fit with my personality, but I think to be a good mentor, you have to know yourself as well.
Mhm.
So maybe we can dive into that. Maybe we'll dive into sort of like being a mentor as a young professional or somebody who, like, hasn't been doing this for 50 years. Because I know when I think of mentors, I think of mentor chats at Women in Camp, which is
Yeah.
incredible. So here's our weekly plug for Women in Camp. Is that they have mentor chats where you can like have the chance to meet with somebody for 15 or 20 minutes who's been working in the industry for, a long time, and who has a lot of wisdom. Like I met with Gabs
Mhm.
once, I met with Beth, Jill Dundas has been there, like lots of incredible folks, and their thoughts that I'm not naming as well, and they're just as incredible. And it's such a neat opportunity to speak with somebody who's been doing that for such a long time. You can like bring them a topic and chat about it, or just chat about your life. But yeah, I think being a mentor as a young professional, I think you have to know yourself first, in what you're able to offer. Does that make sense?
It does, because if you're not sure the direction you're going or want to go, or even who you are as a person, it's really hard as somebody who can be a mentor to help guide that younger person or that newer in the industry person or whatever it might be. Um, but you can then also go about it as, I think, from the other side, as like trying to help them discover who they are as well. Maybe that's the first step they need in mentorship, is figuring out who they are as a human.
I think that if you're helping somebody discover who they are, knowing yourself is important because you can help guide them in that journey in a way that's really personal and specific. And I don't mean like crossing boundaries, but I think that there is something to be said for knowing the way that you interact with other people and what you can offer of yourself. And I say that because I imagine you and I would mentor people very differently, or me
Oh
and
yeah.
somebody who was really like spreadsheet oriented or like goal oriented, um, would mentor differently than I would. Like, as I was saying earlier, like I think that like soft skills, really a holistic view is how I see somebody, but I know that about myself, and that's just sort of how I see the world. But somebody who's really like task list oriented and goal oriented and driven is going to be a better match with somebody who's like that or who needs that in their
Mhm.
life. I don't think your personalities need to match, and that they'll be like, these are my strengths and this is what I can offer this person. Which sort of brings me to the point of that I think when you're looking for somebody to mentor, knowing what it is that they need is important. You don't have to be the same person. I think sometimes for me as a young camp director, I might meet staff and be like, oh, they remind me of me. And so I could be like drawn to that and be like,
Yeah.
oh, like I could offer them something. Um, but I don't think that what I younger me needed was somebody who was just like me at all. What I need, younger me needed, even now, what I need is somebody who's like goal oriented and task list oriented. It could be like, Rachel, like put these systems in place so you can get your things done.
Yeah. I- And I feel like I'm a little bit more, I'm task list oriented, but goals don't work for me.
Mhm.
I'm really bad at actually finishing the thing until the last minute.
Oh yeah, fair.
Yeah. But when I think about younger me, I'm like, what would I have needed? What would I have wanted? Did I know I could ask for mentorship?
Mhm.
Right? Did did I realize that even as a young, like, or a first year camp counselor, that I was probably mentoring these young campers in my cabin
Mm.
in a way that I didn't even know was happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, as a young professional, the first step is like to know yourself. Like, what do you have to offer? How could you help somebody? Are you really good at just listening? Lots of young folks just need somebody to listen. Like, are you good at
Mhm.
listening and maybe like shaping sort of like where they're at and you can help them with that? Like, that's fantastic. Is being a mentor somebody who can, so like that's the first step there. And then it's looking for the folks who need mentoring, and understanding that they don't need to be just like you. And we were going to talk a little bit about when to say no to being a mentor. And I think that's sort of connected in my mind. Sometimes it's knowing when it's like too close to home. Like, am I still working through something
Mhm.
that's also what this person, the mentee, I suppose that's the word, is looking for? If that's the case, then maybe it's not my time.
Yeah, and I also think, like, if your mentee comes this potential mentee comes to you and is like, "This is the support I'm looking for," and you look at your emotional capacity and your workload capacity and all of these things, and you don't have that capacity, depending on what they need. If they're looking for work growth, maybe you have that capacity, but if they're looking for emotional support, maybe you don't have that one, and adjusting what you need, what you have, and knowing what you have available to you to give? How many spoons do you have left?
Absolutely. And what are your boundaries with that? Like, what kind of support is this person looking for? Sometimes
Mhm.
folks are looking for too much support that you can't offer. Like, can you be a mentor who's available 24/7 for, 3 a.m. when they're finishing a paper and they need your help on, maybe they're doing a rec degree that you have experience in? And like, can you pick up the phone then or answer an email at 4 p.m. with a draft of something they need edited for a grant that's due in 6 hours? I don't know what grant applications close at 10 p.m., but apparently in my world they do. Like being aware of those boundaries and what you have to offer there is also really important. And then being clear with those. I think we often talk about the importance of boundaries. We had Ruby on the
Mhm.
show really early on to talk about boundaries. You should check that out if you haven't already. We'll link it in the show notes. But like knowing what those are and setting those really effectively is important, because I think as young pros, we're really tempted to just dive into something right away without setting strong boundaries around that. And that applies to mentorship as well.
For sure. And it just has me thinking about like all the times I should be saying, no, I don't have space for you right now.
Mm.
Because I think there's also a component of like, how long is this mentorship? Do they need like a 15-minute window, or do they need 5 years or 10
Yeah.
years or forever? Right. Because sometimes you might just need to give somebody a snippet of your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I'm really loving where this conversation is going. I think there's so much more to dive into. We're going to get into sort of tackling imposter syndrome with being a mentor, how to be a mentor if you don't know everything, when to start, and sort of what the difference is between coaching and mentoring. Because I know you and I think, have different opinions on that, or points of view, I would say. So stick with us. We'll be right back after this.
Are you a camp professional looking for community and supportive colleagues? Are you a camp interested in accreditation, but unsure of where to start? Are you looking for expert guidance in navigating the continually changing landscape of COVID-19 and the camp industry? Yes, there are still changes happening. Don't worry. They will have your back. Connect with them at info@acail.org and learn more about becoming an ACA Illinois member today.
All right, welcome back to our second half of how to be a mentor, not just how to be mentored, because we've covered that before, and this is sort of like the next step. So let's dive back into this. Cassie, I feel like imposter syndrome with being a mentor is huge. Or maybe that's just me, but I suspect I'm not the only person who feels that way.
For sure. Like, am I even good enough to do this?
Yeah.
Honestly, like, how many times do I sit down at my desk or do something? I'm like, I have no clue what I'm doing. What gives me the right to be a mentor to somebody?
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's a big question, Cassie.
I, it feels, it's probably just me, but like, I don't think I'm good enough to do so many things. Just, we'll just put that out there. Many
Well,
people will yell at me for saying this.
yeah, myself included. And if you're listening, send Cassie a great message about how fantastic she is at everything she does. But now that we've embarrassed you a little bit, the part about imposter syndrome, like I think it's real, because I think when we look at our mentors, generally speaking, especially where we are sort of in our careers, in our life, we're looking at people who've been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. We're looking at like some of the giants in the industry. And I say that with like the most amount of respect for folks who, have been leaders, whether provincially in their state, nationally, internationally, folks who've created massive change, created their own organizations. And I look at that and I'm like, well, I've been doing this for like 10 years and I might know some stuff. But I think it's always a matter of perspective, right? Like the folks that we look up to, in some ways we put them on a pedestal and be like, wow, they know all these things. But then I think back to like 17-year-old me, 18-year-old me when I started, and looking at somebody who's my age now and be like, wow, they also know lots of stuff. So I think you always know more than you think. But because I think of being a mentor as like a holistic thing and more of a guiding somebody, I don't think that a mentor has to have all the answers. In fact, I would argue that a mentor who has all the answers is actually doing a disservice to the person they're mentoring.
I like that. Thank you for helping like shift my mindset there, because that makes total sense. Like, if a mentor is going to give you the answers, where is the mentee getting the skills to help problem solve?
Yeah, and I think like there's certainly a time and a place to be able to go to somebody and be like, oh, crap. Choose my language carefully here because we're on a podcast. Like, I'm in this situation, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm lost. But I think of relationships that I've had with mentors, with folks I've had to call my phone or friends during the summer. And they've generally been like, here is what I might do. I've never been in this exact situation because honestly, I can't. There's lots of situations that like they're not going to be carbon copies of each other. It's all unique to your situation, your environment, and all of those factors. But I've called people and they've said, like, have you thought about this? What about this? It's all about like asking those questions, more so than it is being like,
Yeah.
well, here's what you should do.
Yeah, it's those prompting questions of like to get somebody else, that person's brain moving in the direction that it can solve the problem with guidance.
Exactly. I was talking to Ruby once early on in the pandemic. She did her like Taco Tuesdays where you could sign up to chat with her. It was really cool because like who doesn't want to chat with Ruby? So anyway, so I signed up. We were talking about consulting, and I made a joke because I was like, "Oh, consulting would be fun. I love to give my opinion." That's what I often say at work when people are like, "Rachel, can I get your opinion on this?" And I was like, "I love to give my opinion," and she was like, "But consulting is actually all about asking questions. It's not about giving your opinion. It's just like asking questions and provoking thought in people, so that then they can sort of like discover those answers." And when I did the alt MBA, they also really talked a lot about that ability to ask questions and then sit in silence while people work through them. And to me, that's what mentoring is. It's not about spoon feeding people answers. It's about asking questions and creating space for that conversation and then being able to share from your experiences in some way. But I think there's a lot to be garnered from somebody who's had similar experiences, not necessarily the same experience.
So as you say that, if you work in camp, your mentor does not need to be another camp professional.
No, not always, because I think there's tons to be learned from folks who don't work at camp. And I don't know if that's a bit controversial of me to say, but if you're trying to develop new marketing strategies or even like leadership styles, like I've worked for great managers who've never worked at camp, and maybe you need some advice from somebody who doesn't have like those camp blinders on.
Yeah, and I would add to that, because this is a strong opinion of mine. Camp is a business.
Expand on that. Tell us more, Cassie.
As much as we are mission focused and mission driven, we also run a business. And I think we often lose that business mindset in our work that we do. And we forget that sometimes we need to make those hard decisions. So having somebody external to camp who's never worked at camp, maybe doesn't even like camp, or doesn't understand the value of camp, to help you guide you on the harder business decisions, like when to stay open, when to close, when to make those hard calls, when to help you fire somebody.
Yes, I think I've worked with a lot of folks because I work for a large organization. We've had like some really great HR support, and I feel like that outside perspective is really helpful, because sometimes I think some of the trouble we get into in leadership positions at camp and dealing with conflict and staffing issues specifically is that things become too casual. Like they've lived at camp or they've grown up at camp. They've been there forever. They're third generation. They really need camp. Does camp need them? Well, that's a whole other discussion. And all of these things. And sometimes having somebody who has that like little piece of emotion removed can really give you some good perspective. Or maybe somebody who's just from a totally different industry and can help inject a different type of professionalism into the way that you're dealing with your staff. Can be really helpful and really powerful. I know that I took things from a manager I worked from, and I was like, wow, these things work in an office, which is a more like corporate environment, I would say, even though like it's a nonprofit, but that like sort of office environment. And how can I put this into camp? Because it was what it needed. My like casual leadership style wasn't cutting it, and I needed that outside perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's that point of like finding those people to be mentors or to help mentor from an outside perspective. I think especially being removed from camp now, it's a lot easier to be like, no, just cut ties with that person.
Yeah. So when I come back
time.
to this perspective, like us mentoring other people, I was on a call with some other folks because I'm sort of like new in management at work, and I was talking about I send a Friday afternoon email to my staff team, and it's sort of like I'm still coming up with a creative name, so if anybody has one, hit me up. But it's like a end of week wrap up, and I highlight like a couple specific pieces of feedback for each person, like positive things, and the email goes to everybody so everybody can see what everyone's doing well, and then a little outline of the workflow for the next week. And it's like a fun combination of like camp and also just like how I see the world. And other people are like, wow, like that's really neat. And I was like, oh, okay, so I could mentor people outside of the camp world because I still have things to offer or ideas to offer, or suggestions. And I think that's important as well. I think a lot of the time for young camp pros, who we mentor is going to be connected to camp. But I also think on that note, mentoring people can often be making connections between them and other people.
Yes. That's just a yes.
Is that permission for me to keep rambling then, Cassie?
Yes. My brain is like moving, but at a little bit slower rate. I haven't had my tea yet today.
Oh, and I'm deep into a very strong cup of coffee, so here we are. But I think oftentimes people who I've looked up to mentors have been able to say, oh, I actually, like, I don't know the answer to this, but you should connect with this person. I think often really good mentors are strong connectors of people. And we as young professionals, or sort of like in that middle management role, can be great connectors between the people we look up to and folks who are just coming in the door. We can be the person who's like, oh, have you talked to Gabs about this? Have you talked to Beth or Jackie? Like, we can be that bridge, which is really fantastic and really special. It doesn't take away from your role as being a mentor. It's us knowing like, hey, I actually don't have the answers to that, but I can find you the person who does, and like join in on that conversation or help navigate that conversation. I think that's really, really powerful and is not to be lost.
I am in total agreement here. There's a value in connecting people to help them find the right answer, which also helps expand their network, which then as a mentor, you're bringing more value to that person. You're giving them more skills. You're giving them more connections in their network as well.
Absolutely. And it takes some of the pressure off of you needing to be a walking encyclopedia of knowing everything. Like there's no way that we can all know everything or be experts on everything, or even be able to present information in a way that's helpful to everybody.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure, or I hope that there's folks out there who like the way that I present information, they're like, wow, like this is what I need in my life. But I also know there's people out there who can be like, no, Rachel, like I can't follow what you're saying. It's not making sense to me. But if I were to be like, wow, you should talk to my friend Cassie, they would be like, yeah, I totally get this. This makes sense. And that's fantastic. And I think that's what is special and powerful about the camp world, is that we are engaged in this like tight circle of networking. And we tend to have this like dose of humility of understanding when and where is the best spot for us.
Yeah. And I think as a mentor, being able to recognize that you don't have certain skill sets is important. So it's coming back to that knowing yourself, not just knowing what you have, but also understanding what you don't have.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on a little bit towards, how do you know when you're ready to mentor? Cassie, I think you had some thoughts on this. Like when, I know you were talking about having imposter syndrome, but
Yeah.
when do you think you can be ready to mentor somebody? And don't say in 20 years, because you're already doing it.
Do you actually know, is there a light bulb or like a finish line that you cross when you know you're ready to mentor? I don't think so. I think it's probably an emotional awareness of being like, oh, I'm mentoring. And you don't even know that you've become that person. For me, kind of that light bulb moment of like, oh, I mentor people, was during a leadership exercise in a staff training where you have them like write down that one person that they look to up as leader, yada, 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 right? That one. And then you have them share if they wish to, popcorn style. And one of my staff wrote down my name as a returning staff. I'm like, oh, okay. The game has officially changed. I'm no longer just like this person. I'm also this person. And I think it's a moment where you go, oh, the way I'm phrasing things, the way I'm saying things is in a way that's helping people grow, not just giving them answers. It's not just doing all the things we've previously discussed for the last, I don't know what minute we're on already this episode, but like everything we've discussed is now happening in either a formal or an informal setting, right? And that I also think there's probably a part of you that's like, no, I have the skills and knowledge to do this. Whether you're willing to accept that or not, that's a different question, I think. But it's also that like, no, I have skills, I have knowledge, and I have ability to do this.
Yeah, I think there's like some neat moments where suddenly you'll like be in a situation and you'll be like, wait a second, I sort of instinctively knew how to handle this, or I'm in a situation and I have a few different perspectives on how to handle this. Because I think that there's a difference between walking into a situation and be like, yep, I would do X, Y, Z right now, and that will get me through the situation, versus walking into a situation and be like, I'm probably going to do X, Y, Z, but here are 2 or 3 other things I could do that would also get me through the situation, maybe with different outcomes, or maybe if like circumstances were different, but I think that ability to know a few different ways through a situation is helpful, or a few different like paths to take, because everything's going to be different. And that gives you like shows you have a wider perspective on things. But I think it's also about knowing yourself in that moment where you can start to be like, okay, I could intentionally help somebody through this. It's that switch
Yeah.
from, wait a second, if I was just a little bit more intentional, how much more could I get out of this person? And I think like that part is really important, that intentionality behind it. Like you said, it's a difference between just like spewing out advice and being like, wait a second, you want in on this? I have things to offer. Here's how I can sort of help you through this.
Mhm. But I also think there's like a point where it's before you hit this like more like intentional side that you don't know you're doing it. Or there's the people who it's not a formal mentor mentee relationship where it's kind of informal and you just like, these are your call on people, these or that, but there's no like, hey, you're my mentor, or like, is there a difference between formal and informal mentoring?
I think that I've often gotten to a point where I've turned to somebody, it's often usually a staff member, but sometimes, somebody else who I'm volunteering with or doing other work with, and said, hey, if you'd ever love to talk through any of these things, I don't know that I've ever really phrased it as advice. Maybe it would depend on sort of like the dynamic between me and the person. But if you ever want to talk about this, if you ever want to like hash things out, like let me know and I'd be happy to do that. And I've sort of like put myself out there because I've been like, I think that there's a gap here that I could help you like work through. Not like that I have all the solutions, but I'm like seeing something in that person. So I've sort of reached out, and that's where I've made the transition from like, I'm just like helping you as a staff member to like, I think this could be a little bit more. And that's been helpful for me.
That makes more sense, I think. Yeah.
Because the
Yes.
other person also has to want that. Like they
Yeah.
have to,
It has to
and
be a two-way street.
and sometimes the staff member never reaches out, or the person that I'm looking to mentor, because they aren't interested or they aren't ready yet. They're not there yet. They're still getting their feet under them. But sometimes I'll have somebody reach out and be like, yeah, like I'd love to go for coffee and chat about this, or, grab a drink. I think that that's important. I think that's like the transition from informal to formal. And not every relationship has to sort of take that step either.
Yeah. As you were saying that and like thinking about people who maybe aren't recognizing that they're ready for that, where does somebody's ego play into it as well? I'm thinking of like the overconfident people that are looking for mentorship or maybe need mentorship because they're in this stage of overconfidence.
Yeah, and I think that's when I often try to reach out, be like, hey, like you have tons of potential, which is fantastic. I would love to talk about like how we can channel that. Like, let's talk about where your leadership lies and like where you want to grow and develop. So I'm like playing into that, but then also being like, hey, like here's where we think we could work on it, which I think is really important. It's also important to come across um, on the mentor side of things as not being like super cocky and arrogant, being like, I have all the answers to your problems.
Yeah.
Because that's like, you want to show that you're invested in the person. I think to be invested in somebody, you have to sort of step back a little bit as well. In our last couple of minutes here, I would love to dive into this topic of coaching versus mentoring, and are they different? Because Cassie, I feel like you feel for you, those words are like pretty intertwined.
I think it depends. Now that we've discussed more, I think it depends on the relationship you have with the person. So if I'm looking at my mentees or my staff below me, I have an issue with hierarchies. So I have to coach them, but in our workplace setting, we also have formal mentorship relationships. But I'm also their boss. And where's that line? Like you have to be able to like, I think, change hats, because your mentor is not going to do formal discipline, but the coach might have to.
Yeah, I think for me, coaching is like when like you're faced with a situation or a struggle that somebody's having, and you know that there's a path forwards, and you know that you need or want this person to take this path. And so it's like situation specific, and it's generally short term in my mind. And I think that the word coaching we're muddying the waters with like Instagram coaches, like you can get a coach for anything now. And I think that's sort of becoming like we used to have life coaches or like advisors, and now we have Instagram coaches. But I think, yeah, for me, there's a path forwards. They need help getting through that path. It's short term, focused on specific situation, and often is like a requirement. Like if they're going to keep pursuing this career path, or they're going to keep being employed somewhere, that coaching needs to be there. And like you said, like the coach could offer discipline. I think managers do a lot of coaching.
Yeah.
And when you think of like a coach on a soccer field, like there's consequences for things, right? Like you,
Mhm.
I don't know, did a bad job in the game, you do a lot of burpees afterwards. That seems like a thing a coach does. I don't play soccer, clearly. Like it, but it's very like
Yeah.
coaches often have the answers to things.
Mhm. Yes. Okay. Gotcha.
And to me, mentoring is bigger picture. It's saying like if we go back to the athlete analogy, it's saying like, okay, like like you want to be a pro soccer player, like let's look at different leagues for you. Let's look at like how this is going to factor in with the other relationships in your life and your education. And let's look at like your nutrition. Like it's just like it's bigger picture, more holistic, and there's different paths forward. And you're not necessarily pushing somebody down a path. You're just showing them their options.
So options versus goal oriented or outcome oriented?
Yeah, I think so. Because I might have a mentor that like is going to get me a full-time job in camping, but that's not like a linear path.
Yeah.
But I think a coach, if I were to like want to engage with somebody who's going to coach me, it would be like, okay, like we're going to do the resume, then you're going to have these interviews, and I'm going to give you like specific advice for these interviews. I don't know.
Hmm.
I think that's in my mind where the difference is, but that could just be how it sits with my personality as well.
Yeah. And I think for all of you listening today too, like you might be like, these people, I don't agree with them. That's fine.
No, well, that's the thing, right? Is everyone's going to have a different opinion on it, and a different perspective. And it's dependent on their personality. I'm like a big
Mhm.
concept picture. I like to think and daydream. My ability to like get down into the dirty details of something is not as strong.
Mhm. For sure. My brain's like, yeah, I think there's so many different perceptions here of
Mhm.
what it could look like. Cause there's like coaching, mentoring, managing. There's probably a few other terms that might fit into that. You can't see my hands, but they're doing this. um, of like different words that might fit into this. And I think being maybe even as a mentor, being able to delineate when you need to switch hats and kind of be able to change those as needed so that you're giving the support your mentee needs in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also knowing when to step away and say, this isn't for me right now. Like I need you to connect you with somebody else. Like I can't offer you what you need in this moment. I think that humility and that understanding is really important. But I think if there's a takeaway from this, it's that you can certainly be a mentor regardless of where you are in your career path. Know yourself. And sometimes it's just about making connections and having that relationship.
Perfect. Well, thank you for wrapping us up today, Rachel. We want to thank everybody for joining us here beyond camp. We hope that you were able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and take camp with us wherever we may go. We want you to also be able to reach out and connect with us. You can do so at beyondcamp@gocamp.pro. Please remember to check out our show notes. We'll be linking a couple things in there for this episode. And a round of thank yous, as always, to the team at Go Camp Pro for continuing to hold space for these conversations, to ACA Illinois for their sponsorship of this idea, to our producers, Matt and Jotham, for making sure we sound great every week, and to you, our listeners, your dedication allows us to keep moving forward. Beyond Camp is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Check out all our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next time.